It was November 11, 1987. A day I'll never forget. I was at the peak of my career, working as a freelance image consultant with CBS News. We had just wrapped up a television series, and the evening was a celebration of that success as well as my birthday. My friends and colleagues were there, and I felt accomplished, surrounded by people who appreciated my work. But as the night went on, something felt wrong. I began to feel an overwhelming illness creeping up on me. Sharp stomach cramps that left me doubled over in pain, followed by bleeding. I had been diagnosed with what they thought was a stomach ulcer just months earlier, but I had refused the medication. I convinced myself that I could handle it, that I could heal on my own. But this pain was different. It was far worse than I could have imagined, and I knew something was seriously wrong. I excused myself from the party and drove home. The drive was a blur. All I could think about was getting to my front door. When I finally made it, I collapsed inside, bleeding profusely across the floor. It turned out that my intestinal tract had ruptured, a condition far more severe than anyone had realized. Later, doctors would diagnose me with ulcerative colitis, but at that moment I didn't understand the gravity of the situation. I called a friend for help, and she rushed me to the emergency room. But when we arrived, they wouldn't even check me in. This was the mid-80s, and the AIDS epidemic was wreaking havoc on the healthcare system. They assumed that I was infected with the disease and wouldn't treat me. I was left in a corner in agony, my body losing blood. Time blurred together. Minutes felt like hours as I drifted in and out of consciousness. Then a nurse found me. She became my guardian angel that night. She immediately took control, rushing me into the ER and ensuring that the doctors began to work on me. By the time I was wheeled into the operating room, I was in critical condition. My veins had collapsed from the blood loss, and they could barely keep the IVs in place. As I lay there, fading between life and death, something inexplicable began to happen. A tunnel appeared before me, spinning, rotating, almost like a bullseye. It felt as though everything I had ever known was dissolving, leaving me trapped in this swirling vortex. I didn't understand what was happening, but it felt real, unbelievably real. I could see the doctors around me working in slow motion. They were turning me over, trying to insert N4 into my lower back. Everything was hazy yet vivid as I watched them work. Then, in an instant, everything snapped. My body and mind seemed to disconnect completely. I was no longer in that room with those people. I was no longer bound by my earthly form. I drifted into darkness, only to be pulled into a tunnel. It wasn't a physical pull, but a force tugging at my solar plexus, guiding me forward. I felt as if I was being vacuumed through this tunnel, moving toward a light. And then I saw them, faces, people I knew and some I had long forgotten, friends, family, and even distant relatives who had passed away. They greeted me with smiles, welcoming me as though I had returned home. And then I saw my third-grade teacher, Mrs. Bellamy. But she didn't look as I remembered her. She appeared younger, more vibrant, more alive than I had ever seen her before. It struck me as odd, but I didn't question it. I simply accepted it. As I moved further along the tunnel, something extraordinary began to unfold. I began to see symbols, numbers, equations, patterns, mathematical formulas, even concepts I had never understood before, like quantum physics and complex equations. I had always been creative, an artist at heart, and these complex concepts seemed entirely foreign to me. But at this moment, I understood them as if they were second nature. I was absorbing knowledge, information that I hadn't even realized I could comprehend. And then I reached a tree. It was magnificent. Its branches stretched high, and the leaves shimmered with an ethereal glow. It felt like I was suspended in time, but this tree was different from anything I had ever seen. I felt safe here, at peace. And then, out of nowhere, I saw him. Jesus. He wasn't the image I had grown up with, the white-robed figure with a beard. No, he was different. His presence was radiant, far beyond anything I could have imagined. He stood beside me, radiating warmth and light. And although he didn't speak, I felt his words deep within my soul. His presence enveloped me like a blanket of love, as if I was the most important person in the universe. Do you understand now? Jesus asked in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. His words didn't just touch my ears, they reached deep into my very being like a conversation without words. Every moment of your life matters. Every choice, every action ripples through eternity. You are connected to everything. I watched as he led me through a life review. But this wasn't just a review of my actions. It was a deep, profound understanding of the consequences of my choices. From the moment I was born to the night I was dying, I saw it all. Every single moment, even the ones I had forgotten, replayed in front of me. There was one memory that hit me particularly hard. I remembered standing by my high school locker, my sister next to me. It was my birthday and she asked me, "Aren't you going to tell me how much you love me? I'm your best friend after all." I remember feeling embarrassed because my friends were around, and I didn't want to show any emotion in front of them. I just walked away, and later that night my sister was killed in a car accident. In the life review I heard my thoughts from that moment. Just go away, my friends are watching. The weight of that memory hit me hard, but there was no judgment from Jesus, just a quiet realization. "You could have done better," he said softly, his voice full of understanding and compassion. The review didn't stop there. It showed me the seemingly insignificant moments that had rippling effects, like the time I carelessly flicked a gum wrapper out of my window during a drive. I watched as the wrapper floated downstream, past factories and oil refineries that were polluting the river. It joined a pile of debris, floating toward a group of children who would eventually die from the toxins. I saw the consequences of my actions, even the ones I didn't consider at the time. After the life review, I was taken to a place I can only describe as the Bardo, a space between life and death. Some may call it purgatory, others might describe it as a limbo of sorts. But Jesus was there guiding me. I could feel his presence as I moved through this strange space. Souls, lost souls, struggling souls, those who hadn't yet found peace, moved in and out of this realm. But even in the Bardo I felt a sense of hope. Jesus was there to remind me that no one was beyond redemption. "This is not punishment," he explained, his voice filled with empathy. "This is a time for healing, for rediscovery of love. Even here there's hope." I floated out of the Bardo and into a vast galaxy. I saw the earth below, spinning with life, and as I gazed at it, I saw everything: wars, suffering, cruelty, but also acts of kindness. Teachers, firefighters, neighbors, ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Jesus pointed to the world, showing me how love, even in small doses, had the power to change everything. But then came the moment of choice. "Do you wish to return?" Jesus asked, his voice gentle yet firm. "Do you wish to bring this knowledge of love, of truth, back with you to the living world?" What followed was a vision of what my life would be like if I returned. I saw myself speaking at conferences, writing books, traveling the world, sharing my experience with others. I also saw the long and difficult recovery ahead of me. The pain, the struggles, the isolation. But even then I knew I had a purpose. Despite the challenges, I chose to return. The moment I chose, everything jolted. My body, my consciousness came crashing back into my physical form. I woke up. 3.5 weeks had passed. The doctors couldn't believe I had survived. But when I came back, I was different. I knew things about my disease, things about the medications I had been taking and how they were harming me. My intuition had been heightened. I began to see things I couldn't explain. I saw ghosts in the hospital. Patients who had died, wandering the halls, still wearing their hospital gowns. At first I was terrified. But then I realized they were waiting for something. They were waiting for closure. I spoke to my doctors about what I'd learned, and they dismissed me as delusional. The truth was, I had come back with a gift, but I had no one to share it with. The world hadn't changed, but I had. And that was the most important lesson I learned. Life isn't about avoiding pain. It's about growing through it, loving through it, and knowing that no matter how dark things seem, love always prevails. Months after I had been discharged from the hospital, something incredible happened that I'll never forget. I turned to the doctor who had treated me, and with unwavering conviction I said, "I'm walking." In that moment, something deep inside me clicked. I was determined to prove that my will to live was stronger than anyone's doubts. The doctor, who had questioned my recovery, was stunned when he saw me walking again. I could tell he was speechless by the miraculous transformation before him. It wasn't just my body that was healing. Everything was changing. Spiritually, emotionally, mentally. I was becoming someone new. My physical recovery was a miracle, but the emotional and spiritual transformation was even more profound. I remember walking out of that hospital feeling like I was being reborn. But what I didn't expect was that my relationships, my whole reality, would change forever. It wasn't long before people started distancing themselves from me. Friends who had once been close couldn't understand the changes in me. My family, what little I had left, simply never spoke to me again. Near-death survivors often go through this. The people in our lives struggle to adjust to the new version of us. What we've seen, what we've learned, it's often too much for some to handle. But instead of succumbing to the pain, I made a choice. I chose gratitude. I had been given a second chance at life. I wouldn't waste it. Every day I began a gratitude walk, where I took time to appreciate the beauty around me. After all the time I had lost, especially the time I'd lost when I couldn't see, I wasn't going to take anything for granted again. Every day became precious, and I lived each one as though it might be my last. It was during my hospital recovery that something extraordinary began to happen. My psychic abilities started to manifest. Spirits began appearing to me, and it was as though they were trying to communicate through my thoughts, without speaking a word. They would show up at the foot of my bed, bathed in light. It was as if the world had opened up and I could hear them on an intuitive level through my mind, my soul. I wasn't hearing their voices, but I understood them completely beyond the need for language. At first, I didn't know how to process it. These experiences were unlike anything I had ever known. But as time passed, I began to understand that I was being guided, not just by these spirits, but by a deeper force, a loving presence. And one night, as I lay in my bed, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over me. It was as if someone was holding me, gently supporting me. I felt the presence of Jesus, not in a physical form but as an energy. A light so pure and warm that it filled me with an unshakable sense of unconditional love. It wasn't a vision but a knowing. I knew that this experience was a gift from the divine, reminding me of the love and peace that existed beyond this world. And in that moment I understood that my recovery, this second chance, wasn't just for me. It was for a greater purpose. I had learned that life wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving spiritually, emotionally, and physically. My ability to heal and connect with the spiritual realm was not something I could explain in ordinary terms. I had come to realize that there was more to life than the physical, more than I had ever imagined. And this understanding started to shape every moment of my life. As I navigated this new reality, I started noticing patterns, experiences, and coincidences that pointed to a deeper, unseen force. I started to understand the law of attraction on a level I had never before grasped. I began to see how thoughts truly became things. Every day I wrote down my thoughts, visualizations, and intentions. I trusted that the universe would guide me, and it did. When I was deciding where to move, I had 3 options: Los Angeles, San Francisco, or Denver. But it wasn't until I ran a red light and almost collided with a moving truck that had "Moved to Palm Springs" written on it, that I knew where I needed to be. It was a sign, a clear message from the universe, and I followed it. Moving to Palm Springs without a job was a leap of faith. Yet it turned out to be one of the best decisions of my life. I started writing my book about my near-death experience, sharing the lessons I had learned, and I began speaking about my journey publicly. My intuition guided me every step of the way, even when others doubted me. When I was invited to appear on the TV show Sightings, many warned me against it, but I listened to my gut and followed my heart. That decision led to new opportunities one never imagined. There were challenges, of course. Financial struggles, homelessness, moments of deep doubt. But even in those dark times, I found that good people showed up to help me. I had learned that if you trust the process, if you trust the universe, it will provide. There are always people, places, and opportunities that come when you need them the most. Looking at the state of the world today, I often think about what I've learned through my near-death experience. People often ask me if we are in the end times, and my answer is simple. We have always been in the end times. The world is constantly shifting, but we have a message to share. A message of love, kindness, and compassion. That's what we must focus on no matter what. The world is searching for answers, and the answer is always love. I had learned that the categories we create in this life, race, religion, wealth, they don't exist in the spiritual realm. In the afterlife, there is no judgment based on these things. What matters there is love, spirit, and our actions in life. When I saw Jesus during my near-death experience, I understood that he wasn't there to judge me or anyone else. He was there to guide us, to teach us how to love unconditionally without boundaries or limits. What I experienced in that moment was a love so deep, so vast, that it felt like the entire universe was wrapped in it. There was no division, no separation, just unity. Jesus embodied that truth, showing me that we are all connected and that everything we do in life, every act of kindness, every choice we make, ripples out and affects the whole. During my life review, I saw how something as simple as dropping a gum wrapper had a ripple effect. The smallest things, the moments we don't think about, matter. Now I strive to live consciously. I try to make every action count. I've become more environmentally aware, more mindful of my words and actions, knowing that they have consequences. Before my NDE, I didn't always tell people how much I loved them. But now, I express my love and appreciation as often as I can. I've learned that love is a gift we should never take for granted. We may not always have the chance to say the things we want to say. I regret not telling my sister how much I loved her when I had the chance. But now, I make sure to tell everyone in my life how much they mean to me. When I face conflict or difficulty, I try to approach it with compassion. During my life review, I saw how many conflicts arise from misunderstandings or unspoken pain. Now, I try to see beyond the words or actions of others. I try to understand what's behind the conflict, knowing that everyone is struggling with something, and sometimes all it takes is a little kindness to change the entire situation. Before my near-death experience, I didn't believe in anything beyond the physical. I was agnostic, but everything changed. What I experienced was beyond any religion or tradition. It was universal, encompassing all the love and wisdom that Jesus taught. I now understand that the divine is not a judgmental God. It is a loving, supportive universe that is constantly guiding us. I no longer see the world the same way. The experience has shown me that love is the only truth. I respect all spiritual paths that promote love and compassion, but I now know that the essence of all spiritual truth is found in the love that Jesus embodied. He showed me that the divine is not about rules but about love, and that we are all part of that love. Our task here on earth is to share that love with others, and in doing so we will bring about a profound shift in humanity. We are all interconnected, and that interconnectedness is the true reality of the universe. And about my psychic abilities I talked about earlier, it's not always the same. Sometimes I see spirits as clearly as I see people here in the physical world. Other times, it's more intuitive or a feeling, where I just know something about a person or situation without anyone saying a word. I've also received messages through symbols, or even in dreams that later make perfect sense. There was this one time that my abilities really made a difference in my work. I was working alongside detectives on an unsolved murder case. I kept seeing an image of a very specific flower, one that I couldn't understand the significance of at first. But when I passed this detail along to the detectives, it turned out to be crucial. This flower was tattooed on the victim's body, in a place that had never been mentioned in the case reports. This little detail led them to re-examine the evidence, and eventually they solved the case. It was a profound reminder of how these abilities are not just a personal gift, but something that can actually help others. At first, I doubted my abilities. It was overwhelming, especially in the beginning. It felt like I was bombarded by information and I didn't always know how to process it. But over time I began to trust them more. I've had so many experiences where things have been verified that it's hard to doubt now. Still, I always remind others to use discernment. I don't believe in blindly accepting everything, even from someone who claims to have psychic abilities. When I came back from my near-death experience, NDE, reintegrating into society was one of the toughest things I've ever had to do. The perspective I returned with was so different from everyone around me. I had seen the other side. I understood life and death in ways I couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't experienced it. Many people couldn't understand or accept what I had gone through. I lost friends and some family members distanced themselves. For a long time I felt so incredibly alone. It was a period of isolation that was hard to bear, but eventually I learned to cope. I had to accept that being different was okay. I leaned into the love I had felt during my NDE and tried to hold on to that sense of peace. Over time, I found others who either shared similar experiences or were open to understanding mine. Building that community, people who understood or were willing to listen, became my lifeline. Then there's the law of attraction and manifesting. To me, it's all about aligning your thoughts, beliefs, and actions with your desires. Every morning, I set clear intentions. I focus on visualizing what I want to achieve or experience. But I've come to realize that manifesting isn't just about positive thinking. It's about taking inspired action, remaining open to opportunities, and acting when the time is right. For example, when I decided to write a book, I had no idea where to start. But I set the intention and visualized myself as an author. Not long after, I met someone at a party who introduced me to a literary agent. Doors began to open and opportunities appeared that I could never have planned. But the key was staying open and willing to take action when those opportunities arose. It hasn't always been easy though. I've mentioned before that I can see both the physical world and the spiritual one, which can be overwhelming at times. At first, I was constantly receiving information, seeing spirits everywhere. It was like a constant flood of sensory input. I had to learn how to set boundaries and find ways to turn it off when I needed to just be present in the physical world. Now, I see this gift as something that helps me and others, but I make sure to stay grounded. After my NDE, I also brought back a message of love and compassion. But in a world that often feels filled with conflict and negativity, it can be hard to keep that perspective. I see the news and I experience the same challenges as everyone else. But my NDE gave me a broader view of things. I understand now that what we see on the surface is often just a small part of the bigger picture. I focus on the good I see in individuals, on the small acts of kindness that happen every day, even if they don't always make the headlines. When I talk to others about staying positive, I encourage them to practice gratitude. Focus on what's good in your life, no matter how small. And also, be the change you want to see in the world. If you want more kindness, be kind. If you want more love, be loving. It's simple, but it's powerful. It shifts the energy not just around you, but in you. I also believe that we all have a purpose, and discovering it often comes down to tuning into your passions and your natural gifts. Pay attention to the things that bring you joy and the things you're naturally good at. Sometimes our challenges, the things we struggle with the most, can actually lead us to our true purpose. My NDE, for example, led me to the purpose of sharing my story and helping others. Listening to your intuition and being willing to take risks is key to following your heart. When it comes to death, my view has changed dramatically since my NDE. I no longer fear it. I see it as a transition rather than an end. I value this life deeply, every moment, every lesson, but I now understand that death is not something to fear. What awaits us on the other side is beyond anything I could have imagined in my previous life. This understanding has affected how I live my life. I try to stay present, making the most of each moment. I don't take anything for granted anymore. I focus on learning, loving, and serving others. I'm not perfect, of course. I still struggle and I still make mistakes. But I try to approach each day as a gift and an opportunity for growth. Since my NDE, I've accomplished so much. becoming an author, a speaker, and a paranormal investigator. But I feel like I'm just getting started. I want to share the message of love and interconnectedness that I brought back. I'm working on another book and I'm exploring new ways to use technology to reach even more people. I'm also very interested in the intersection of science and spirituality, and I'm hoping to work more closely with researchers in those fields. And finally, if I could leave you with one last piece of advice, it would be this. Remember that you are loved beyond measure. You are part of something far greater than yourself. Don't be afraid to live authentically and follow your heart. Be kind to yourself and to others. And never underestimate the power of a single act of love or kindness. It can change the world in ways you might never see.